War is one of the most intense experiences any person will ever be made to endure. Many things can cause a soldier's experience in a war to change, from the morals of their country to whether they experienced victory, defeat, or even a never-ending stalemate. However, during World War I, a lot of soldiers still experienced very similar things. The movies 1917 by director Sam Mendes and All Quiet on the Western Front by director Edward Berger provide audiences with a way to see how British soldiers and German soldiers experienced World War I. These directors used the conventions of the war genre to portray this. The convention of wartime camaraderie is important because during wars, soldiers will form deep bonds with each other. This makes it all the more tragic for them whenever they lose one of their friends in battle. The film 1917 begins with two main characters and ends with one. These two characters, Blake and Schofield, looked out for each other and cared deeply for each other. This made it very hard on Schofield when a German soldier killed Blake. However, Schofield doesn't get too much time to mourn Blake, because he still has something very important to do, and very little time to do it. All Quiet on the Western Front has many main characters, and by the end of the movie, all of them will be dead. The deaths of their friends impacts how the characters act and feel throughout the rest of the movie, and sometimes characters will even talk about how much they miss their friends. Once Paul, the protagonist of the movie, loses all of his friends, he starts to appear lifeless, and the only purpose he seems to have left in life is protecting a new recruit during the last battle of the war. The next important thing to look at is the depiction of wartime destruction. The battles fought during World War I devastated the landscape, and both Sam Mendes and Edward Berger had their own way of depicting it. In 1917, the destruction is shown through crowded shots, and the camera work makes it feel like you are witnessing the war with these characters. This makes it easier for some audiences, and many audiences in fact, to sympathize with the soldiers as they witness all this. In this scene in particular, the area progressively gets worse as they get closer to No Man's Land. No Man's Land is the area that is right in between the British and German battle lines. This area has been completely destroyed by the war, and according to Quora, World War I artifacts and remnants can still be seen to this day. All Quiet on the Western Front has its own way of showing the overall destruction of the war. Edward Berger did this through a combination of eye-level shots that allowed audiences to see the war as the soldiers would, as well as wide landscape shots that allowed audiences to see entire landscapes of the war, and often made the soldiers feel much smaller in comparison. By doing this, audiences can better understand the massive scale of this war and how devastating it was. To further emphasize this bleakness, these shots would use lots of gray and red colors. The gray emphasizes the lifelessness of it all, and the red emphasizes the weapons and the destruction they are causing. Both of these movies use their scenery to show the destruction of the war, but 1917 wanted audiences to experience this destruction with the soldiers, while All Quiet on the Western Front wanted audiences to truly understand the scale and the destruction of what was happening during this war. War is a terrifying thing to be involved in, and the soldiers in World War I were made to endure many horrifying experiences. 1917 isn't as concerned about portraying the fear the soldiers were made to endure, because the two main characters have to get to where they need to go quickly, or else hundreds of soldiers will die. As a result, they don't have to cower in the trenches, and the younger character, Blake, who would typically experience more fear instead, feels determination, because he wants to save his older brother. However, fear can still be seen in other characters that they meet, which can be seen in moments like this.
One slow night, the brass think the Hun have just gone home.
Do you think they're wrong, sir?
We lost an officer and 3 men 2 nights ago. They were shot to bits patching up wire. We dragged 2 of them back here. Needn't bother.
Sir,
The General is sure the enemy have withdrawn. There are aerials of the new line that...
Shut up! We fought and died over every inch of this fucking place. Now they suddenly give us miles. It's a trap. But tune up, there's a medal in it, for sure. Nothing like a scrap of ribbon to cheer up a widow.
All Quiet on the Western Front wanted audiences to understand what it was like to be a German soldier during this war, and constantly displayed the fear that these soldiers felt. Soldiers are shown having panic attacks and being too scared to move and need help from some of the older soldiers to survive whenever things get like this. The fear of death was really hard for these soldiers to handle, and caused even more of them to die. While 1917 wasn't as concerned about displaying this side of the war, both of these movies still showed that the war was a terrifying experience to be involved in. A major part of war movies is the point of no return. This is the point where the soldiers will now face whatever trials await them, and there is no turning back from it. The timing of this point varies depending on which war movie you are watching, but generally happens somewhat early in the movie. In 1917, the point of no return happens when the two main characters are asked to deliver a message to a colonel, telling him to call off his attack because he is being lured into a trap by the Germans. The characters must take up this call to action because one of the characters' brothers is in this colonel's unit. Once they leave to deliver this message, they never turn back and only move toward the colonel's unit. In All Quiet on the Western Front, the point of no return happens in a very different way. It happens when the characters are enlisting for the war. The characters are made to feel like glorious heroes of their country and are told in a very passionate-sounding speech that with their help, Germany will soon win the war, and they will get to come back home as heroic men who can always be proud, knowing that they fought for their country. This speech excites the characters. Everything that happens in this scene contrasts what they will experience during the war. During this scene, the colors are bright, and the characters are excited to fight in this war. On the other hand, during the war, the colors are very dark as well as the lighting, and the characters are filled with dread and fear. Sam Mendes, the director of 1917, and Edward Berger, the director of All Quiet on the Western Front, used the conventions of the wartime genre to express what World War I was like. The first major convention was wartime camaraderie, which shows the brotherhoods these soldiers will make with each other. The next convention was the depiction of wartime destruction, which shows how the battlefield destroyed towns and scarred landscapes. Then there's the convention of wartime fear, which shows just how terrifying this war was to the soldiers. And finally, there's the point of no return, where the soldiers can no longer return to the way things were before. These conventions show that both sides of the war deeply relied on wartime camaraderie. They both scarred the landscape, and they both endured large amounts of wartime fear. The point of no return shows that the soldiers on the British side of the war considered this was a noble one against the Germans, while many German soldiers felt conned into joining the war and were met with nothing but failed promises.